Welcome to the session, Gateway to the G20 and the World. We're going to start by playing a clip from the G20 India Sherpa. It's about a minute. So while they get the video, I'm just going to give a quick introduction of the G20. The G20 was founded in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis as a forum for finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss global economic and financial issues. The G20 was upgraded in 2008 to the level of heads of state and government in the wake of the global economic and financial crisis of 2007 and again in 2009. It was then designated the premier forum for international economic cooperation. So there are currently 20 countries and a few guest countries. So G20 involves the countries, and then there is something else called the Think 20, and Mateen will talk about the Think 20.
Hi. So the title below the G20 that you see, the Indian theme is, in the Hindi is pronounced as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means one earth, one family, one future. And just want to tell you about the G20 logo that draws inspiration from the vibrant colors of India's national flag, the saffron, white, and the green and blue. It juxtaposes planet Earth with the lotus, India's national flower that reflects growth amid challenges. The Earth reflects India's pro-planet approach to life, one in perfect harmony with nature. The Think 20, which is abbreviated as T20, is an official G20 Engagement Group, which was initiated during the Mexican presidency of G20 in 2012. It serves as an idea bank for the G20 by bringing together think tanks and high-level experts to discuss relevant international socio-economic issues. T20 recommendations are synthesized into policy briefs and presented to G20 working groups, ministerial meetings, and leaders' summit to help the G20 deliver concrete policy measures.
I'm happy to be here today speaking to all of you. I would have wanted to be there in person, but unfortunately my official commitments do not permit me to travel for TiEcon this year. However, I'm truly delighted to be given an opportunity to share a few updates from India, and I look forward to your continuous support and partnership as we build the innovation ecosystem globally and in India. First of all, I would like to congratulate TiE's Global Connect on being selected as an official Think Tank 20 side event. This is especially important for me because this year, as you know, I'm the G20 Sherpa for India, and your continuation will be invaluable. TiE has always been a great friend to India, and I look forward to weaving in your inputs as the G20 leaders discuss and set the agenda for global economic development. I also want to take this opportunity to applaud TiE Silicon Valley on its 30th year. This is a remarkable achievement that showcases the importance of innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology in driving economic growth and development. During our G20 presidency, India is committed to finding pragmatic global solutions for the well-being of all citizens of the world. We believe and have experienced that digital public infrastructure is key to achieving this goal efficiently, effectively, and at global scale as compared to every other option available. We are inviting the world to come and learn from India's unique example. And as expected, the world is partnering with India to develop their own DPI.
Hello and greetings from India. Delighted to join you on the occasion of TiEcon 2023. First of all, my heartiest congratulations to the organizers who for the past 30 years have put together this fantastic arena of ideas, of entrepreneurs, of tech evangelists, of all of us who believe that technology can do good, technology can create value, and technology can indeed solve problems that all of us commonly and individually are confronted with. So congratulations for this wonderful gathering, which this time around is also coinciding with a very special year, the year of India's G20 presidency. On this occasion, I'm delighted as Observer Research Foundation and indeed as the chair of the T20 Secretariat to partner with all of you and to put together a conversation that is important for India's G20 presidency, a priority for India, and many of us believe importantly crucial conversation to have for the world around digital public infrastructure. But before I come to that, let me also acknowledge the contribution of two very important individuals at the T20 process, Sharad Sharma and of course my own colleague Anirban Sarma, both of who have been leading the conversation around DPIs and why they are important for the G20 countries and for others around the world.
We're going to introduce our keynote speaker, Dheeraj Pandey, to talk a little about digital public infrastructure. Mr. Pandey is the chairman and CEO of DevRev, a SaaS company that is focusing on using AI and design to automate software and customer engineering workflows. Previously, he co-founded Nutanix in 2009 and served as the CEO and chairman of its board of directors until December 2020. Dheeraj, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Hope the audio-visual gods do justice to what I intend to talk about today. This conference actually forced me to think a little bit more about G20, T20, also about the digital payments infrastructure of India. I had been seeing this from afar, and obviously I will say that I'm still a student, I'm still very early in really knowing about this thing that people call the India stack. But what really struck me is how in the last 10 years, almost 1 billion people have gotten their first national identity card, the first bank account, the first bank loan, the first smartphone, the first set of cashless payments, not just sending payments, but also receiving payments. And I think it's just mind-boggling. I mean, people who talk about how they used to hide their money in the sock because otherwise they were afraid of getting robbed. And in many ways, the government is using this infrastructure now to really disperse social welfare payments. Which is extremely unique. I mean, it creates an immense amount of accountability and traceability and transparency. So it's a big deal, very big deal for the country, but the question is, what does it mean for the rest of the world, especially G20? From all accounts, assuming the rupee were to be a stable currency, which I think it could in the coming decade, a lot depends on India's overall greed for exports and also how imports behave with respect to oil and the price of oil and everything else. But assuming rupee stays stable, in the next 10 years, there is a $10 trillion economy to be had in India. Just 5% inflation, another 5-6% of growth. You can compound it year after year. India could actually be a $10 trillion economy, which very much was China's path from 2006. 2006-07 is when China was as big as India is right now. And there was an immense focus on infrastructure. Now, infrastructure for India has been a lot more than just physical infrastructure. It's also has meant digital infrastructure. And it takes a real stab at corruption. I mean, basically the fact that there's no middlemen, the fact that you can really disperse money down to the base of the pyramid instantly. And we saw that during COVID times as well. A couple of 100 million people were actually paid by the government instantly. And this is unprecedented. So there's a $10 trillion economy in the next 10 years, and a lot will rest on the shoulders of this holy trinity of this infrastructure, which starts with identity. Any of us who've actually built SaaS companies have known how identity is a big deal, to really be able to do this in real time for 1.4 billion people and counting is a really difficult computer science problem, all the way from spoofing and fraud to privacy and confidentiality and so on. So identity is one. The second is payments, and we've seen obviously billions of payments a month, which is a scale that's unprecedented, that even probably Visa and MasterCard had never seen in the last 30 years or 40 years of their own existence. And finally, data. The fact that there is a digital locker in which the history of a person can actually be saved and retrieved in real time for financial transactions and otherwise. And they're like really interesting. For the first time, I see the government talk about APIs, you know. I haven't seen governments ever even know what the spelling of APIs is, or how do you even elaborate it to say it's application programmer interface. But there are people in the government now who speak APIs. And the people in RBI who actually sit, the Reserve Bank of India, they sit with banking CIOs and their tech team. I know of this firsthand. And they talk about API failures and API latency. They're like, if you're going to be delayed in your transactions, and if you have API failures and all these errors that APIs have, then you will be penalized. And this is just completely unprecedented, never heard of in the history of the world of finance, that a central bank would actually, and their tech people will sit with banks in real time, every quarter, just like audit committees do this, you know, every quarter there is an audit of API latency and API failures, which is very, very unique. So, big things happening. I mean, there is apps that people are building on these APIs, like paperless COVID-19 certificates, to a one-stop shop for utility bills, to schools knowing how to really disperse their, share their curriculum, all using this infrastructure and the API itself. And there's a whole plethora of fintech apps being built, you know, where they're using real-time decisioning, you know, based on the data coming out of these payments transactions, and also the data that people have in their digital locker to make real-time decisions on loans and mortgages. So, just amazing what the country has actually come to build in the last 10 years. It's called the India Stack, and at 1.4 billion people and billions of transactions a month, it's a monster. It's a fortress that has, you know, with it comes with its own unique headaches of data privacy and, you know, data protection and confidentiality and integrity and all that stuff as well. And if you couple it with the other revolution happening in India, that's a $46 billion a real gamble that Reliance and Mukesh Ambani has actually played on India's data highway. You know, that's a $46 billion gamble that he has played on saying, look, if you make data free, then people will come and actually use the rest of his services and others as well. So that's called Geo. So Geo and the India Stack have really been unprecedented. They've brought really a revolution that promises to make India into an economic power that promises, now time will tell what equitable means in this next 10, 15, 20 years. The more digital we get, it also creates a challenge of the haves and the have-nots. And, you know, if you compare it to the problems the last 2 years in China, you know, they've basically taken the world with a complete shock. It's very abrupt, this idea of common prosperity. I feel like common prosperity is actually being achieved in India grounds up with this digital payments infrastructure through this India Stack. And time will tell whether you really can clamp this idea of common prosperity and take away the wealth of these very large companies that were really created in China in the last 10 years, or you do this bottoms up, the way India promises to actually do. But more importantly, I feel like it also creates a unified federal structure. I mean, if you compare it to the way we have this fragmented database of states, each state has its own database of driver's licenses and health records and property records and land records and things like that. It's pretty painful to really come and deal with what happens across states, and not to say what these hospitals and healthcare systems, they dread to share their data with any competitor out there. You know, it's just painful. So in many ways, what I see is a very fluid and a very dynamic world that's happening in India because of this idea that, you can have a unified federal structure. People can move. There's going to be a fluid movement of people, transfer of property, and hopefully a due process of law itself. So the key question is, what's in it for the rest of the world? I mean, it's amazing that 1.4 billion people will actually get onto this infrastructure, will have a bank account for the first time, will have the ability to really take loans in real time, anywhere and everywhere. But what's in it for the rest of the world? And that's the question that this India Stack team has been asking through G20 about its relevance and its overall applicability to the global north. I mean, G20 is really two halves. There's the developed ones, which people call the global north, and then there is the yet to fully developed ones, that's called the global south. And this is where the problem really starts. I mean, it's all or nothing. The India Stack is all or nothing because you got to first build the identity layer, then you got to build the payments layer, then you got to build the data layer. But the Western world already has some form of legacy. There's a social security system, there's Visa, MasterCard rails, and a more laissez-faire sort of approach to information technology and healthcare, education and finance. Well, in a capitalist world, the private markets take care of these things. We don't have to. So the gain of this extremely equitable and promising infrastructure is probably not as big, especially when you compare it to the pain of migrating out of what they already have right now. And as startups, we face this, day in and day out. When we go and talk to large enterprises, they start with the question of, so what's the wedge? VCs ask us, what's the wedge? And what's the first use case, and what's the minimal viable product? So the India Stack has this product market fit problem that all startups actually face. How do you really go and sell this to a world that's relatively calcified? It already has existing systems. Migration is not that easy. And it's an all or nothing approach itself. I think there's some lessons that we can learn from, startups' experience here when it comes to the India Stack itself. At DevRev, which is my new company, we deal with customer service, product management, software development, and how do you really modernize this whole thing. But we have to go in with a wedge, with a use case, with something that is an instant dopamine for these customers who already have existing systems. And I think our solution, just like the India Stack for G20, has to be more than just delightfully fast. I think it has to be where the puck is headed, not where the puck is right now. And they already have solutions where the puck is right now, with Visa, MasterCard, with social security systems, and some existing central databases and such, So the question is, where is the puck headed? And if you look at, just going back to how companies are looking at it, what does the global north really care for going forward? The question has been asked for the last 25, 30 years. Populations have actually ebbed. They've stagnated and now ebbed. And everybody's looking for productivity. Like, what about productivity, and how do we improve productivity of people while they still figure out immigration, which is actually a pretty pesky issue in the Western world. But productivity will probably come from this new thing that everybody's talking about, which we'll get to as well. But I want to take a step back and talk about just the evolution of just our universe. We came up with at least this notion, we feel like how the universe was created. Big Bang. There was a Big Bang, and physics was created almost 14 billion years ago. And that, to me, is identity. That's Aadhaar. Aadhaar was the Big Bang, which really helped create, about 500 million years later, chemistry got created, atoms started to really react with each other. And that chemistry is payments and data. So there is a whole lot of things happening now with respect to how we are trying to integrate data from different silos and really helping payments and the financial world and retail and so on and so forth. But there's a biology of all of this that obviously took like 9 more billion years for it to actually appear on Earth. But that biology is AI. And digital for India will be incomplete without really thinking hard about what's the role of AI. Because that's where the Western world will actually perk up and say, look, this is where the puck is headed. It's beyond just the legacy we already have. And now it looks relevant because it brings productivity to our nations, which actually are challenged on immigration and population growth. So we ask these questions. What's the role of AI in the future of India's digital infrastructure? What's the role of AI in this legal traffic jam that India has? I mean, I don't know if you folks know, but there's civil and criminal lawsuits that were created in the last 100 years that as a backlog will take another 100 years to actually resolve if we had to go through all of that stuff. There's too much of language. You know, it's not English, but there's a lot of language sitting in these lawsuits that can probably only be worked upon if you really thought about 2 things, supply of judges, but also what machines can actually do to help this. What's the role of AI in fintech fraud? I mean, now that we have really enabled this trifecta of smartphones that have become really cheap because of loans, Geo and Phone Pay and Google Pay and so on, there's immense amounts of fraud that's happening at the base of the pyramid that really needs to be looked at. And it's not humanly possible for people to do this by throwing more auditors or just by throwing arms and legs at this. So there's a big role that AI has to play in this digital infrastructure. The role of large language models in creating mobile-friendly interfaces for a lot of people who are not English-speaking. You know, there's a big swath of India that doesn't speak English, and they have 15 national languages. So India has to work really hard on what this generative AI, the GPT infrastructure, the LLM infrastructure means for these national languages. But equally, the role of Gen AI in making a lot of tier 2, tier 3 cities of India more employable. A lot of tier 2, tier 3 colleges of India more employable from day one. We just heard folks here talking about Canada and how the Waterloo corridor actually has students coming out who go and really do internships at Google and at Microsoft and places like that. So by the time they graduate, they're employable, which is a big deal for a lot of employers out there. But in the absence of these internships, what's the real employability of these people? It's really going to come down to ChatGPT and the idea that you have a co-pilot next to you. And I mean, we saw that. I mean, Google and social media in the last 15 years really did that. People got so much more than what I was when I was 15 or 20 or 25. So there's a big role that AI has to play in helping people go create videos and create content and curate it, and really bring a lot of tier 2, tier 3 towns of India into this realm of employability by the Western world, where population is a big challenge. The role of AI in drug discovery and vaccine discovery and modeling the next pandemic. You know, the next pandemic is not another 100 years out. It's probably sooner, given the pace at which we are, you know, doing deforestation in this world. So we really need to get many of these things done at a faster pace to really predict the next pandemic. And lastly, I think, but probably the most important one, is the role of AI in education. You know, really co-pilots for teachers and students and administrators, because the new ed tech, and I was seeing Chegg's report yesterday, their quarterly earnings report yesterday. And Dan is a good friend of mine. Dan is the CEO of Chegg, and he was talking about how ChatGPT is now affecting their financial performance, because students are now on ChatGPT and asking the same kind of questions, and the answers are equally wise, if not more, than what a bunch of experts, human experts, could actually deliver on the Chegg platform. So the Chegg stock has been hammered in the last 24 hours, been down 50%, because of what's looming. It's ChatGPT competing with a company that's existed in the world of tuitions and school homeworks and things like that for the last 10, 15 years. So there's a big role that AI has to play in the world of education, because those interfaces will crawl and summarize and gather and index and organize and transcribe and rephrase and cluster and deduplicate immense amounts of knowledge for which you might not need a tutor, after all, and to pay so much money that Baiju's of the world have made in the last 10 years probably is going to be possible through a co-pilot coming from a GPT-like interface. Now, China solved for this literacy index problem with a very draconian top-down one-child policy. It says, look, it's going to be one child, and we'll fix literacy index just like that, because the denominator is reduced, the numerator is whatever, you actually hacked your way into literacy index. That's the only index that India lags by more than 30 years against China. Everything else is 15 years behind except for the literacy index. And it won't be solved by actually having a top-down one-child policy. If anything, if you look at China, now they're giving incentives for having 3 children, because the pendulum has swung the other way. The entire population premium they had in the last 30 years, in the next 30 will be a big challenge. So India's got to solve it India way. We are co-pilots, and hopefully we are a new form of Google that is customizable and domain-specific and sentient. But this is a big problem for 1.4 billion people. This computer science problem in AI, in serving all of this AI for 1.5 billion people and more, it's impossible to gather enough hardware, enough GPUs, enough data center capacity, enough compute capacity, that it's just not possible to do this in a centralized architecture like OpenAI. If you think about this big Borg that's called OpenAI out there, it's centralized. The only jugaad to all of this will be to decentralize AI. That's the way things will actually work for billions of people with tens of billions of transactions a day that are clustering and summarizing and organizing and rephrasing, and all the ings that you can actually imagine in the world of language will actually happen through a model that is not centralized, simply because it's not economically feasible. Now, this is how the internet really democratized. If you go back to the early era of the internet, everything was server-side, the browser was dumb, it was all HTML, and pretty much all processing used to happen on the server. And obviously, gradually we said, look, we're going to really move more and more processing power, more logic to the browser. And that is how the internet really democratized and became cheaper as opposed to what was happening in the first 5 years of the internet. That's how computing got democratized. We had big, massive mainframes. OpenAI is a big, massive mainframe. If anything, it's a much bigger version of what IBM introduced with Watson. The good thing is that we have API that's on the internet, it's accessible, there's even a chat interface to really interact with OpenAI, but it has the same problems of centralization that pretty much the mainframe suffered with. And what did we do to democratize computing was to make it smaller. So we made Unix computers, and from Unix we went to PCs, and PCs we went to laptops, and laptops went to tablets, and tablets to smartphones. And that's how we gave access to a computer to 8 billion people. That is how AI will need to decentralize. There's going to be immense amounts of, and it already runs on your and my phones in computational photography. What these phones try to do to fix your pictures is AI. And we do need a lot of that stuff to happen on these as well. So what's in it for a lot of you? Look at this Make in India campaign and the policy that India has. There's going to be immense amounts of manufacturing push towards India. I think there's going to be new kinds of smartphones and tablets being built in the coming 10 years that will have AI chips that will decentralize a lot of this OpenAI's power. And as a startup, if some of you folks are thinking about, so what's it for me and how do I do this? What kind of access do you have? You have access to ARM processor design technologies. You have access to open source LLMs. You have access to India's manufacturing, at least promise of the next 10, 15, 20 years of small. And you also will have amazing lessons to learn from the centralized architecture of OpenAI as well. And most importantly, and a very different business model than advertising. Because advertising basically has been a global north We loved it. Everything was free. Social media, the internet, everything was free. But it was not really free. And we started to really see the implications of that. The scourge of advertising, what it really is meant on our websites, the clutter, the privacy issues, the confidentiality issues. People are really trying to figure out the next browser to use rather than Chrome. We're trying to get rid of cookies because cookies have too much data. There's too much sharing going on without real permissions, and on and on and on. So there is another business model to be had here, which is really around subscription. And to a lot of the skeptics of this digital infrastructure that India has, a lot of people are like, well, what about data protection? What about privacy? What about confidentiality? I say to them that the global north has suffered more from lack of privacy and confidentiality because of the advertising business model and the fact that the consumer was the product. The consumer was the product that was actively being bought and sold on ad networks in the last 15 years, way more than what the West would actually have entertained if it were really being done by the government. So there is a cleaner business model to be had here with subscription, provided we can decentralize AI. So my last sort of point on this is, for some of you who actually think about how do I really monetize this, what's in it for me, how do I make money on top of this, you will have a real big data lake in front of you with access to digital infrastructure, especially if money passes through you. You'll have a lot of data. It's free. You can't make money on that data transfer, unlike Visa and MasterCard. But if you take a step back, many of you that I speak with, you are bored at your jobs. Many people are just bored at their jobs. They're moonlighting for the next startup because they want to get funded by a VC here in the Valley. And they're also looking for a purpose. They're like, what's my purpose now, Many people are like, maybe I just need to wind down and that's it, that's the end of my professional career. And what's from here, I feel could be a new purpose. This is rallying cry for everybody. That your career, your children, your parents, then your belongings were your purpose all this while. But in the next phase of your life, perhaps a bigger purpose is the children of the global south, such that they could be protected from the scourge of illiteracy and, cyber fraud and the next COVID. I think we really need to go and think about what you can do to contribute to this open source that is the India stack. There is a big element of contributing to this community, which could be the next purpose for you. And that's the way you really complete this trend. With this new purpose, a digital India could really complete this holy trinity of its soft power. I look at its soft power. If you can't tell, I'm a big Indophile. And I love India, which is the first, 21 years of my life. And it has given a few things to the world, And the first thing was spirituality. Thing is Bollywood. And the third thing could be digital infrastructure, And this will complete the trinity of the country's contribution to the rest of the world. And that probably, to me, the last one, this invisible hand of infrastructure. Creating a real playing field for, 2 billion people. For doing this looks like